thanks for being here. Charles told me there's a lot to discuss. There's a lot of things that you want to, on one hand, give out as a call to action, but also, on the other hand, references on the status quo of the industry. I'm not sure on the audience who knows you, because you said maybe people do not know you, which I can't believe, but if there are some which do not know you, can you do a short personal intro who you are?
Okay, right. Well, I feel like I've been in the outdoor sector since about 1875, so my youthful looks belie that. I started in the outdoor sector with a company called Berghaus. I was far more interested in climbing when I was a student than I was in studying, and I fell into a retail shop that was owned by one of the brands, a brand called Berghaus. That 2-month contract at Berghaus turned out to be about 15 years long, and I started working like a lot of you lot in the outdoor sector.
What was the role at Berghaus by that time?
Making the tea and coffee for the sales team. I'm not joking. That was more or less, that was the dog's body for the sales team. And I, Berghaus was an interesting company at the time because unlike current situations, we still at that time had a factory with a night shift and a day shift, nearly 600 people working in the factory. Even things like backpack buckles were designed and molded in-house. Everything was virtually made in-house. All the fabric testing, all the sample making, everything, all the packages, the time and motion for loading the factory, everything that all the mechanics that you needed for an outdoor brand were there in Tyneside in the UK. And that was a really good, it was like an apprenticeship because eventually I ended up going through all the different departments. But then originally, international sales. I studied languages at university or linguistics and ended up working on the international sales team, which was interesting.
Interesting for quite a while. And then you were one of the inventors of collaboration, cooperation, and therefore as an association as well. So maybe some words.
Yeah.
What happened after Berghaus?
Oh, what happened after Berghaus? Well, I buggered off to Switzerland for a few years with Mammoth Sports Group, which was also really interesting. And then I came back to Berghaus again. And at that time, brands in the industry knew each other to look at. They knew each other to nod at. But if there was ever a problem within the sector, it was straight to lawyers and slap an injunction on each other. So when you got to ISPO, you never knew who was going to have some injunction slapped on them because they infringed some design aspect or something like that. It was utterly ridiculous. Together with the CEO of Mammoth Sports Group, Rolf Schmid, we were having a cup of coffee for, I can't even remember what over, and we said, this is stupid, why don't we do something about it? So we invited 21 brands to come together to talk about this. And 19 of them came, which was pretty good. And at that meeting, we basically said, right, there are so many things we could do together if we could look each other in the eye and learn to be a bit more grown up and cooperate with each other. And we founded the EOG. And at the time...
For those who are not familiar with the short word...
The European Outdoor Group.
Thank you.
So it's basically a pre-competitive association for brands working in the outdoor sector. It was a bit stupid naming it the European Outdoor Group because essentially it's global and most of the American brands are part of it.
A huge step for the history of the outdoor industry because, and when we had our prep talk, it was the roots for the European Outdoor Group were together with which is called now EOCA, with everything on the collaborational side. So we're going to hit that later on. But for now, not accepting the status quo, the reason for the speech right now there the fire is! Hey. Yeah. So the reason for not accepting status quo has something to do with all the buzzwords, which comes around vision, which comes around motivation and non-competitive, pre-competitive, everything we were saying. But give us an intro. Why did you have the status for yourself not accepting? What's going on if we have the background of your history in terms of associations, of outdoor industry, and from that point we will start. What's the problem?
Well, if you think about competition and the way competition works, or pre-competitive competition works, you end up with a sector like we have here with seemingly millions of people doing millions of things and all rushing around in this ecosphere. with no connections between them and lots of great initiatives, but perhaps no common thread, no central guiding philosophy or idea as to how we could collectively improve. And I always felt that that was utterly suboptimal, and that if, as a sector, we could learn to find ways to decide what that common thread should be for the sector, then we'd all benefit. The alternative way is to say an association just looks at business and how you make business better, and I wasn't in the least bit interested in that.
And this is already now a little influenced by your association background, but when we started discussing, you pretty well outlined what's the silos thing. The silos on what we think
Oh,
on.
the silos, yeah.
Silos, sorry.
Yeah.
Silo. So some words on that, please.
Yeah. Okay. Well, a silo. Maybe that's a little bit down the line, Kim. But we all know in companies that we can build companies on. You can have a matrix company where everybody is referencing everything around the site, or you can have departmental companies where you develop something and you rush up to a wall and you throw it over the wall and say, right, nothing to do with me now. Get on with it, sourcing department, or get on with it. And if you have that situation, you are always going to be creating roadblocks for your own company. And that's exactly the same for the wider sector. If we, for example, treat corporate responsibility and sustainability and outreach as separate individual things, it will never work, because they're not. And take for example the role of biodiversity in the race to zero. Where does biodiversity come into it? So can you in all honesty separate these things out and see them as this one is more important than this, or this one has nothing to do with that? You need to find that way of working together with things. And from the very beginning, well, not quite the beginning, maybe a year or so in, when I started getting involved in the EOG program, I decided that the best approach was to say that from a sectoral point of view, deciding ourselves how we want to run our companies, i.e. from a moral standpoint of view, what are the guiding principles that we wish to use to run our company operations, then reducing the impact of our companies, and then finally, what do we give back? So how do we square that circle, and how do we find a better way of doing things, in contrast to the sort of random way of doing things?
And you mentioned net to zero, which would be like, we start at the beginning. There was the EOG, and there are the principles of the EOG, which I learned over the previous years on three principles based exactly on the way when you visit a show, when you have I was told you are not doing so much speeches on stage, but there's the moment right now for seeing what the principles were, being in a role at Berghaus, and then creating the European Outdoor Group. There were principles which are also visionary by that time and now. Can you sum up the principles for the European Outdoor Group by that time, please?
I don't know if they're visionary in the sense. To me, they seem to be common sense and practical things to do.
That's why you make the difference.
No, well, I mean, I'm not so sure that, I think that there are better ways of joining business up, and often as companies and as individuals, rather than looking at what solutions are there available for us, we have a tendency to want to make them up ourselves. And that, for me, is never going to be the most optimal way of doing things. If there is an adjacent area that we within the outdoor sector can benefit from, it's much more sensible to go and look about what is available and who are the experts in that area, and then try and find an alignment that everybody can agree on. So for example, on the social responsibility side, we knew that we had to move things forward in the European Outdoor Group, but we didn't want to do it ourselves. We didn't have the resources to do it ourselves. So we went and looked at everybody, and we finally came up with the idea that the Fair Wear Foundation was the closest to our sector. It was the one that understood our sector the most. So we then worked on that, and eventually more and more brands within the EOG joined Fair Wear Foundation, and it's now the largest part of Fair Wear Foundation's membership. So outdoor has become an increasingly important thing for them. But not only that, we then said, well, we don't just want to work with you as a third-party supplier, we want to get involved. So we did. So we got involved with Fairware, and we joined the board of Fairware. I joined the board of Fairware, and now, 10 years on, I'm still part of Fairware.
This is why it's saying in the title up here.
What am I
It's
saying?
saying Fairware Foundation non-executive chair.
Oh, yeah, sorry, beg your
Yeah.
pardon.
Is there?
Well, there you go, it's obvious then.
And talking to working groups, silos, and the outcome of, let's call it the recent period of European Outdoor Group. There are different groups and memberships. Maybe you can outline on the structure a bit of what you implemented, because you were saying the biosphere was one of the starting points, and give us a journey on the European Outdoor Group.
Well, I suppose the EOG started as a brand-only organisation, but we always made the initiatives open to everybody. So when we started with sustainability, it was never just brands only and bugger off everybody else, you're not welcome. It was always done on behalf of the entire sector. And after a while, we then thought, well, it's pretty stupid not having ingredient brands or anybody else, along the supply chain involved. And so we've gradually opened up the membership, so it's a much wider base for the membership. And you can do more with a wider base. But it's more difficult to keep the coherence I was talking about. So the more diverse parts you have within an organization, the more difficult it is to keep that common thread. Actually, by the way, I'm just looking at Antje there and eating. And I was thinking that when we started the EOG, the idea of cooperation was pretty unusual. As I said, usually it was fighting each other. And I knew that if you had these three pillars, it would be more effective and it would work. But where should we start? So we started at the wrong end. We started with the conservation end, because I knew that was something that would resonate with people from the outdoor sector, their backgrounds, their understanding, their love of nature, and the desire to give something back. So the first thing we did was set up the European Outdoor Conservation Association. And it worked. It worked in terms of the fact that the companies realized that if they joined together and put their money into a central pool, we could do more for conservation. And that organization is growing in importance, and particularly as the understanding of the need to improve biodiversity and protect biodiversity, it's becoming more and more important for us. So interesting how you can move these things around. And
European Outdoor Group, in which year were we when the foundation was?
Like,
you founded one?
Now I'm thinking, was it 2005, I think it was?
And EOCA?
Formally. EOCA was a couple of years later. Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe 3 years later.
So, summarizing from now, we are on net race to zero. Can you go back? What happened, and what does this project mean to you?
What does race to zero mean? Well, again, if you think about what
is race to zero first, and then what it means.
Well, I mean, Race to Zero is an initiative of the United Nations, and the aim is to cut greenhouse gases by, I think it's 30%, something I'm sure somebody in the audience will give me a more accurate number than I can remember on these things. But it's basically, it is exactly what I've been saying. It's a collaborative initiative that gives people the tools and the wherewithal to manage their own journey to cut their emissions, and that's an ideal thing for people in the outdoor industry. But how do you then move that from being something that is talked about in the press to something that the outdoor sector could adapt? So we went through a process of discussing it with the membership, and eventually we put a vote to the members that we wish to make it a mandatory part of being in the EOG. So, you want to sign up for the EOG, you have to sign up to the Race to Zero. And that's not trying to tell you how to do it, necessarily. We'll provide you with a lot of tools. And also looking at the audience, we have a pretty brilliant expert team within that area that is helping the membership work towards these goals. But it's, it just allows us to amplify the consistency of message across what we're doing. So that's where I started off, all these millions of different initiatives. they will never be scalable if they continue to be millions of different initiatives. They'll only be scalable if you can bring people along and get everybody to agree on common initiatives.
Absolutely, and that's why I was asking, because having the contradictive question on the title, not accepting status quo. This is what you implemented together with the team of the European Outdoor Group, and then when I got to learn more on your work, it was around 2015, and you accused me to ask too many questions.
I accused you. I accused you, did I? Okay.
So, but anyhow, if we are seeing, not accepting the status quo, seeing what recently happened from the teams of the European Outdoor Group, getting this going so that the full industry on outdoor made, okay, we need to take care for it. What's the next thing if we are saying not accepting status quo?
Okay, well, let me look at everybody around here and say that for me the biggest challenge is where does your right to
where's
run,
the audience, you mean?
yeah, no, where does your right to run your company the way you wish to run it become something that impacts the whole in a negative way? And you know, when times get tough in a sector, it becomes really tough to keep a common thread going. You know, when we're all making profit and things are good and the order books are good, then it is much easier to get people to talk about things outside of the fact that I have 9 months worth of stock sitting in my warehouse, or I have to cancel this or cancel that. It really is, for me, a question of saying, yes, please run your own businesses the way you wish to run your own business, but always be mindful of the longer term impact of your short term decisions. I don't know if that makes sense to everybody, but you know, that to me is the most present challenge at the moment. And in actual fact, I think we're in danger of going slightly backwards as a result of this downturn of the sector. We're in danger of becoming more individualistic as companies and looking at our own situations by necessity almost, but it's not a healthy thing for the wider sector. I've got a slight analogy. I remember when I was a salesman, you know, running around Europe selling Berghaus and things, and you would develop a market, and you might have a retailer in a town, and I remember Brussels as being one special one, where that retailer was your original partner, and they'd done fantastically, but they were super resistant about having any other retailers in Brussels because they wanted to protect their own little bubble as they saw it. And the moment you could convince them that you could have more retail in that area, the pie grew for everybody. The awareness of the brand grew in that sector, and that original retailer did way better after there were several competitors in that town than before. And that's an analogy for our entire industry, that if we become too individualistic and we focus too much on our own woes in our short term, we stand to lose out on the longer term.
I was going to ask, is there any concrete example from nowadays which you want to share where your thoughts came up to?
Well, that's a dangerous subject at
I
the
know.
moment, because I don't know if you know that I wrote I'm brave, me. I wrote an open letter to the industry a couple of weeks ago, challenging people to think about the value of trade fairs. Not because trade fairs are not still going okay, but I see this present danger of people becoming short-term and thinking that, well, we could maybe do without going to a trade fair, we could go with, maybe not come to performance days, maybe not come to Outdoor by ISPO or whatever, outdoor retailer. And then as a consequence of that, we could potentially lose something which I see as a community asset. So I don't see a trade fair as just a profit-making thing or some ability for you to come and talk to your customers. I see it as a community asset that makes us all stronger. And let's face it, where on earth could you get as much intelligence and as many connections and as many networking opportunities as you can in 3 or 4 days of a trade fair when you're a small company working globally? You can't do it. So it's a classic example of a potential loss to us if we don't learn to adapt and find ways of working with it. Doesn't mean to say the trade fairs are right, but they might well need to evolve themselves and might need to change to fulfill it. But we need to have that grown-up conversation that says, what part do they play in our structure and our ecosphere?
Absolutely, and we had a short discussion on how collaborative can competitive, whether shows, whether platforms, whether brands, whether associations, how far can that go? And if we see this as a status quo for now, and seeing this, of course, in my other business role as well, how far can we go to competition and collaboration? What's the call to action for the fields of play? So on one hand, we have the Fairware Foundation. On the other hand, we have the European Outdoor Group. We have EOCA, and we also have It's Great Out There. So there are various fields of play. It could be a detail and very concrete example now, or something like a holistic view. Let's take us part on your thoughts. What could be the call to action for us sitting here listening to you? Concrete one, if you like.
I'm not entirely sure I understand your question, Kim, but
Oh,
I'll come up with an
I
answer. If I don't understand your
I'm
question,
used
I'll
to
make my own answer up somewhere along the way. I think for me, I'm not precious about the EOG or Fairware Foundation or anything. I'm not precious about things. What I would say is that look at your own company circumstances and find ways of cooperating with people you believe are like-minded. So if you, on your social side, if you want to be part of ETI or you want to be part of another initiative, I don't care, as long as you do something, as long as you act, as long as you take those steps to build out your own. I mean, listening to David earlier on today, about the decisions they're making, and they're great if we can scale them. There are things that they are thinking of and doing that we can all benefit from. So look outside, find your ideal partners to work with, and work to scale the things that you believe in.
So maybe we can hand over the microphone to you, David, to resume, because maybe some people were not there in that time. But let's keep.
Sorry, David.
Yeah,
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
I could do for you. The reason why I was saying that is that that's the question of the personalities we work with, of the scale of possibilities, and also the financial sector, how we can evolve. And you were giving some concrete examples, and this is what I was asking. Is there? You can share whatever you want, but if it could be politically wise, dealing with all the associations and what's going on. It could be financially wise. What do we need to take care for? And especially what we were saying in the prep talk, if sustainability comes into the game, we need to take care for the holistic view. So going back to my question, what can you concrete point out for us to share as a call to action from your side? Because you are opening letters, you are with the EOG, with the EOCA, with Fairware. What's the concrete call to action for all of us?
I would say that if you wish to be completely selfish and look at things as a means of protecting yourself, then it is absolutely common sense to look at giving yourself a competitive advantage by being different. So differentiation, basically. And if you think about outdoor brands, it's not hard to be an outdoor brand. You don't need very much. You can become an outdoor brand by having a good idea. And as long as you've got some money, you can go to a third-party intermediary and you can buy some designs and you can get some products made, and suddenly you're an outdoor brand. And what differentiates you as a brand from a sports brand, a Nike or an Adidas? So where is the difference between what we maybe think of as an outdoor brand and a generic sports brand? So if you don't have something that you stand for or that makes you different, ultimately you will lose out. You might make money for a little while, but you will lose out. And I think we as a sector have always had that natural affinity with the environment, with the desire to treat people properly, and to do the right thing. So that is an inbuilt, almost advantage of the outdoor sector. But it's only an advantage if we can enhance it and we can work together to make it and make it a reality and share it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But the sector being in the forefront of these things is a brilliant thing to do. So at the moment the European Union's looking at CSDDD, and that's corporate social due diligence. And the big companies were all up in arms. Now, you know, a lot of the outdoor companies have been working on this for years. So we're already ahead of the game. We're already ahead of the game in terms of and again, I'm looking at the audience and I won't look at anybody in particular, at working with our supply chains to reduce our chemical impact and all the other things that we do. So we are already, as an area, ahead of the game. But you can't sit on your laurels. You need to be constantly finding that way of staying ahead and spotting where things are going to go and how they're going to change, and adapting and learning to adapt quickly so that you are ahead of yourself.
Yeah.
Being ahead of the curve, essentially, is what I've always said.
So,
And you're only ahead of the curve by learning to look around corners. It's a strange phrase, looking around corners, but actually, if you think about it, it's looking and working out where the permutations of things in the future will be. And I think that's a major part of what the EOG does, is it tries to think ahead and look at where the industry needs to adapt and where it needs to cooperate to make things better for the longer term.
which is non-competitive.
Yeah, it's all non-competitive.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
So for me, the visionary thing was the motivation would be signed off. You have answered that one. Is that the same for you? Are there open questions? Is there something you want to share with Mark or ask Mark? Antje?
Don't all speak at once. Anybody's allowed to ask questions apart from Mark Taylor, because he asks bloody difficult questions.
So if possible, say your name, the field you're working for, so that everybody understands where you're coming from.
So my name is Antje, and I used to be part of the brand world, still within the brand world, but now with Blue Sign. Just an add-on to Mark's great statements. It's never, so the job is never done, and I think this is something we also have to really just keep in mind. So it goes ahead, it goes ahead, it goes ahead, and it's never done, this very, very important job. Thanks.
Yeah, you can't sit on your hands and think I've nailed it, can you? You know, there's always going to be something else, and things are evolving all the time. So,
Yeah, and you're one of the most contributive persons in that scene, so thank you for speaking up.
Hi, my name's David. I've been working in the outdoor sector, I suppose, for about 3 years now, and I've recently branched out into doing more freelance. And the question I have is, as a freelancer, how would you advise me to help implement some of these practices or persuade brands that I work with to be more conscientious or make more steps, or even if it's my place to request or advise that they do so?
now, David, the honest answer to that is you're between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, I don't know how big your consultancy is. On the one hand, you might need to take the business because you need the business to survive. But on the other hand, if you have the flexibility to start to influence those companies you're working with, having your own set of, your own moral compass in your head about what you believe is right in terms of labor, fabrics, input, biodiversity, all those factors that we talked about, allows you to bring something special in your design world. It allows you to bring more than just a fancy design. But it is very dependent on who your customers are and how you can use that and leverage it for yourself. So I hope you're in the latter, not the former. I hope you're just not having to take every job that comes along.
It's 50-50 at the moment.
And I would love to add something. Are you, or a question before, are you a designer?
Yeah, so I do from creation to in-house sampling to then factory liaising, I suppose.
Okay. So my answer would be get as concrete as you can on knowledge, what is allowed, what is not allowed, because legislative helps us. But seeing eco-design as a part of your work, which should be exactly what you're saying, do your business right, and this is for every part of the value chain. Do your business right. And if it's overconsumption you need to tackle, if it's where do you get the stuff from, is it regionally possible, everything on a very concrete level, then it's knowledge transfer which has nothing to do with generations, how long you are in the company or how old you are. It's existing, there are so many informations around here, and this is exactly the place to be, to get home with the best things, because all the people here share what they learned over the years, so that would be my recommendation for you.
Thank you, that's great to hear. My entire time at university was heavily dependent on sustainability and the environmental impact of it. And then as soon as I went into the sector, it was very polar to that. So
Oh, really?
moving more towards it would be great, to be honest.
Yeah, we haven't really touched on education, but I think education is such a huge part of what we do. And you know, my daughter, one of my daughters, ended up doing a textiles degree at, I mentioned this earlier, at Glasgow University. And she came out of her textiles degree, and I was talking to her, and I thought, she doesn't know anything about textiles. How can you do a degree and not learn about all these component parts? How can you not know about chemistry? How can you not know about engineering? And you know, and it's just as you know, during my time, I've been responsible for design and sourcing and marketing at companies, Berghaus, Low Alpine, and I've had to employ young designers coming in, and the level of knowledge of the young designers coming in was really not very brilliant, I have to say. You know, good at designing pretty things, but not necessarily good at integrating all the component parts that go into with what we need as a sector. So education, super important, I think, and better education.
Yeah, better education, combining the wonderful heritage you learn in shows and platforms, that we are back again on knowledge transfer, but also combining everything you learn, which maybe I would speak now only for myself, with
Feel free.
artificial...
I can interview you if you like.
Yes, please. With artificial intelligence, combining that with the knowledge we have as an heritage, this is the perfect moment to really transfer everything you bring into the other value chain points. So if you see, for example, the show organizers here, when you call it behind the scenes and having all the trend forums everywhere, and the next one will be Alexa Dimmel showing which kind of players are around. So try to really understand the language which is neutral. Do not get guided away from what you are really looking for in terms of the essence. How do you want to work in 10 years? This is super straight, super forward, and super concrete. Yeah. Sorry.
I said all that
Getting a
without
little
opening
patient
my
on that.
mouth. That was very clever.
Thank you. Any more questions from our audience? You're only allowed to ask me, I guess, if I trust you what you're saying. Why is Mark not allowed to ask questions?
Because he's... No, I was only a joke.
Okay.
Of course you are. Of course
British
you are,
humor?
Mark. Of course you are.
No, I won't ask a question. No, it's just based on what you just said. We, a couple of years ago, we were approached by a very large European fashion brand.
I need to interrupt you. Can you please say who you are and what you're doing?
Sorry. I'm Mark Taylor at the University of Leeds. Sorry. And
Thank you.
they wanted us to put together a training package for all their staff about sustainability. So we went out to visit them at their head office and be really careful so nobody knows who they are. But when we got there, it became clear that most of their designers and buyers actually had no knowledge about textiles at all. That's what Mark was saying. But it's even worse. I once watched a video Cotton Inc. had put together on their cotton, and they talked about weaving, whilst the video was clearly showing a circular knitting machine. You know, and these are people that should know. So, yeah. But we're trying really hard at Leeds to fix that, producing 25 wonderful graduates a year that you all might want to think about employing.
So no answer on that one? Mark,
Pardon?
do you want to comment that one?
No, I totally agree. I think it's you know, fundamentally what I used to do with these young graduates. I used to team the graduates up with an industrial designer and with somebody who understood engineering. You know, I mean, the product engineering, and that way you could bring them on in a very quick way rather than leaving them to just do pretty pictures, which is a bit demeaning, I know. But ultimately, they needed to be educated. But I think it is incumbent on all of us, if we're going to have that level of integrity through our companies, that we invest in the education of people coming into the sector.
Thank you, Mark.
Come
Thank
on, you must
Mark.
have some more questions before I disappear and fly back to England.
I will stay here with you in the
Well,
fire.
I did insist. They said it was a fireside chat, so I said, "Where's the fire?" So they managed to conjure up the fire from somewhere. It's not very warm.
It feels warm, but I don't know why. So, if there are no more questions out there,
Psychological.
we thank you for
It's a
listening
pleasure.
to us. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Performance Days team, for organizing all this so brilliant. We have another 5 minutes to go for the next format, which I will introduce. If there are no questions, and if you're fine with that.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks a lot, Mark. see you later around?
Take care.
Or are you flying right now?
I'm going straight away. Yep.
Okay. Have a safe flight.